Hi, everyone. Good evening. It's great to have so many people here this evening. We've been doing a lot of these events for a while. I think this is definitely the biggest turnout we've had, which is really great. We're delighted to welcome Zack and Paul. Paul is the head of agent development at Sierra, and Zack is the head of product. So we're really excited to have him. Give everyone a round of applause for the. So before we dive into the main topic of this evening, which is agents, tell us a little bit about your backgrounds, how you guys got into tech and into AI, and then what led to your roles at Sierra today.
I got into technology in college. That was around when the iPhone came out, and I'd never done any programming before, but I decided for a final project in a class to just try to build an iPhone app. It was a psychology class, and I did like a nutrition tracker, and I just realized that I would just stay up later and later every night building stuff, even though it was like very rudimentary. And then I think just kind of got bit by the coding bug that way. And so studied computer science, went to Google, worked with Tao, who's in the front row now. And
The friendly faces in the front row always helps, I think.
getting into AI was actually kind of an accident. I was working on search, on Google search, but up until somewhat recently, Google search was somewhat opinionatedly not AI, because of the idea that it's not as auditable. You know, if you have a black box, you can't debug a specific query. And so we got approached by another company to do computer vision, very popular consumer photo app. And I was one of the, at the time, in the deep history, I was one of the young people in the company. And and so I was one of the users of the app. And so I started working on it. And it just kind of snowballed from there and ended up becoming the technology behind Google Lens. But it was a very different AI from what we have today. It was still neural networks, but convolutional neural networks. We weren't reading, it was 2017, but we weren't reading the attention paper. And so I sort of was in AI, but not really in the thing that would go on to change everything. And then I think when ChatGPT came out, maybe a little bit before that with GPT-3, you could see it coming. But when ChatGPT came out, it was just like, how can you not work in AI? Was kind of how I felt instantly.
Similar story. I got the coding bug probably pretty young, as many people do, trying to modify some video games and build some mods that blow stuff up.
Minecraft.
And, Minecraft, exactly. Make the TNT a nuclear bomb. Yeah. We've all been there. And went on to study actually mechanical engineering not too far from here in Zurich at ETH, and always kept coding on the side. ETH makes it very flexible on what you actually end up working on, and so I worked on a lot of computer vision stuff over time. Ended up at Google as well in Zurich, worked on search and flights, and ultimately ended up in California. And very similarly, was working on AI stuff at Google and felt like one could move faster. And ended up at Sierra.
So Paul and I went on a long walk by
Yes,
the Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. And I convinced him he could move faster.
Yes.
So what is an agent, I guess, is the first question. That's the main topic of tonight. And what is an agent? What can they do? For anyone new to LLMs, the world of AI workflows, agentic workflows, what's an agent and what do they do?
I can give my answer. I'm sure people have their own answers. Oftentimes, people think of an agent as it does things while you're not supervising it. Or, I think if you asked people 2 years ago, they might have said it accesses a knowledge base. I think now the definition of agent has been lifted up above that very low bar. In my head, what makes something an agent is if it has complex reasoning. So it can actually think through problems in many different steps. And so anything that is sort of a one-shot prompt is probably below my personal bar, but there are probably better prompt engineers than me in the room who can achieve so-called agentic behavior with just one. I think where it really clicked for me is when you have kind of series of prompts and context management so that a computer system is making reasonable decisions with complex inputs. And then I think it's bonus points if you're doing long-running tasks off in the background, unsupervised, all these kinds of things that cursor background agents or Devin are doing, which are really impressive too. Did I cover your?
For you? Covers.
It does, yeah. Like I think agent comes from acting, right? And so like really the breakthrough is that you can now have software that actually thinks or like does something that approximates thinking and actually delivers results and can act on behalf of you. And so whether that's like short running, long running, I think like that's ultimately what an agent is. But it's everyone has their own definition of it on where they do the cutoff, I think.
Yeah. So to warm us up into it a little bit, we'll have a couple of fun questions, some rapid fire questions. We'll start you off with, if you could give any superpower to an AI agent to help make your life a little bit easier, what would it be today?
You told me this question was coming. And whenever anyone asks me the superpower question, I just think fly. But then I was like, I can't think of why an AI agent should fly. So Paul, you can go first.
Well, I've been a bit surprised that like, the simple things of like knowledge work around like inbox and calendar and Slack and all of those things are still like so unsolved. Zach and I joke often on a Friday evening that like getting to Slack inbox 0 before the weekend is like the best feeling ever.
Yeah.
I wish it could just do that automatically and download those things in my brain somehow.
Yeah. Then you spend like 39% of your time at inbox 0 instead of 0.
Yes.
So it's the best time to do that. I think for me, I haven't really found the ability to cut to the heart of things. We were talking about this a little bit, so it's topical. I was using Granola today, big Granola fan, and meeting notes for me, I consider meeting notes to be very high leverage because even though they're kind of perceived as maybe like grunt work in some ways, you're sending a message to like often tens or hundreds of people. And so if it's a really good notes, it makes a huge difference in the context and productivity of the company. And oftentimes there are just dynamics in a meeting of who everyone is and if someone was being nice to someone else, but like you can kind of interpret the truth. So I think when AI can really understand kind of like what's going on underneath, that'll be really powerful. The other personal test I have is stand-up comedy and like joke writing. I haven't really witnessed a large language model be funny. And so that will be.
I was coming up with my questions to make some fun questions. It wasn't.
Very funny.
That will be really cool, I think. Another one. Now I'm just kind of spouting off, but another one. The inputs of like text and image and video are like somewhat limited, and I know most robotics right now is still focused on kind of video input and actuation and stuff. I know it's not like necessarily a close field of research, but when you will also have like touch input and like what we learn from feeling things and tasting things, I think that'll be really cool.
Those are really good answers. I think I was going to say just to do my taxes, which isn't really a superpower.
Oh, yeah.
That granola answer is actually pretty good. I should have come up with that. All right, so if you guys could go back to the prehistoric caves of 2016, before LLMs, before everything, what advice would you give yourself now?
You had a better answer than me.
Yeah, I said buy NVIDIA stock. Other than that,
everyone's in agreement on that one.
I had read the attention paper, which is
that's
overly nerdy.
Another good one is like start a PhD in some like really weird, machine translation because like it will pan out, it will work.
Yeah.
I think like I'm pretty happy how things have worked out, but certainly like back then, I think the fascinating thing is like this was all not very obvious. Like it very much came from like esoteric like translation and autocomplete problems, and you just auto-completed your tokens to the max somehow. So certainly would have like loved to see that earlier, but I certainly didn't. I was doing computer vision stuff and completely off in a different area.
Yeah, same. Maybe another good one that's kind of glib is like don't give up on reinforcement learning.
Yeah.
Because that seemed smart at the time and now seems smart again.
Yeah, and there kind of do seem to be these cycles of purely unsupervised learning and unsupervised learning, focusing on reinforcement learning more specifically. Like, what are the hype cycles now in AI that you consider overrated versus underrated at the moment?
It's so hard to tell because it also really depends on the availability of different technology and where you can allocate compute and what data you have, what algorithms you have. So I think any answer is probably going to be wrong in 6 months or was wrong 6 months ago. I kind of think right now the sort of reinforcement learning, verifiable reward stuff is correctly extremely hyped. And so like Anthropic's focus on coding makes a lot of sense. I think that's really smart. And so what this is for folks in the room without full context, basically, if you can verify that something is the right answer, you can create a feedback loop of training on it much more efficiently than if you need someone to have an opinion about what the right answer is, or if subject matter experts might disagree, more than 10% of the time about which answer is better. And so in a case like coding, where code either compiles or it doesn't, the page either renders or it doesn't, you can write tests and kind of speed up the loop of reinforcement learning and training. I think if you asked people a year ago, kind of anything fine-tuning related was not that practical, and mostly was focused on supervised fine-tuning. And maybe like few-shot prompting would have been my answer. And so I don't know what the answer will be in 6 months, but I think there's a lot of benefit in just trying to be right for the next 3 months with how fast things are moving.
Yeah, my sense is actually like, as an industry, things are probably appropriately hyped. That doesn't mean that like there will be some companies, that will obviously go to zero. The good examples are probably like model training. It's a tough business to be in, to like burn a couple $100 million and have a very fast depreciating asset after that. And so, the bet is really like, do you have enough smart people, and do you get close enough to something that resembles AGI, or do you not? And so I think as an industry, that's probably appropriate. Like, it's probably appropriate for us as humanity to put in, a couple $1 trillion into that. But that doesn't mean that like a lot of that will go to waste and to zero.
Yeah, so focusing more on the application layer, I guess.
Yeah, I think the application layer, specifically vertical applications, is maybe like underhyped. Mm-hmm. And so that's obviously the space that Sierra plays in. That's the space Cursor plays in. That's the space Harvey plays in, the sort of legal AI. And I feel like those are sufficiently distinct and require really deep integration and deep knowledge. Mm-hmm. And so if I had to do a startup besides Sierra, I think it would probably still be in that kind of space. Yeah. If I was a smarter researcher, maybe I would take a crack at the foundation model stuff, because that's very fun and interesting too.
Yeah.
So Sierra is the conversational AI platform for business. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that actually means? What does Sierra do? What kind of customers do they work with? And then what kind of AI solutions do you guys build for them?
Yeah, one of the most fun things about working at Sierra is working really closely with customers. Paul and I both joined the company in the same job, which is called our agent product manager job. We have agent PMs and agent engineers. And so I think everyone is kind of doing it to a degree in AI, but I think maybe more than most, we really leaned into this kind of forward deployed model of getting really close to customers. My first assignment when I joined the company was to build the SiriusXM agent. And now if you go to SiriusXM.com, there's a little circle in the bottom right corner, and if you click it, you get a Sierra agent that can help you, refresh the radio in your car because the encryption keys have expired, or manage your plan, upgrade, all of these things. And really, I think a big part of the job is understanding the business that you're working with, as well as they do. Once you know exactly what they want, the building of the agent, I won't say it's not the hard part, but it is, probably not the hard part. And so that process of discovery, that process of working with customers is very entrepreneurial. It's very high leverage. And I think it's unique to the time that we're in and to working at Sierra.
Not much to add.
Yeah. So you've spoken a
You
lot
can
about
take the next one.
I was going to say, you've spoken a lot about the agent development lifecycle that you guys have at Sierra. I want to know what's different between that and the traditional software development lifecycle that most people will know, where you write code, compile it, you test it, and then you ship it. What's the difference for the agent development lifecycle?
So I think it can be summed up very simply that traditional software is fast, cheap, and reliable, and large language models are slow, expensive, and non-deterministic. And so because of those three things, you need to put guardrails in place, and you need to put processes for change management in place that are somewhat different from what was required before. So as an example, you might have had unit testing before. Now we have a simulations product that actually interacts with the agent, not just one time, but 10 times per simulation, so that you know that it actually worked all 10 times, because 90% is not good enough, or maybe 100 times. It depends kind of what your threshold is. The same way you'll have continuous integration and continuous deployment in traditional software model, you'll have what we call critical simulations, which will actually block a release of the agent to make sure that you're passing everything that you've agreed upon in your organization. So we kind of have this loop that looks pretty similar to the software development lifecycle, sort of like plan, build, test, release, analyze, optimize, plan, build, over and over and over again. But the actual mechanics, if you drill down into each step, are very different because you're dealing with these flexible, creative, but not necessarily reliable systems. And so you need a lot more in place to make sure that they're behaving reliably. A lot of the software that Sierra's built, I think a lot of our, to the extent that we have sort of thought leadership, it's been in this space. And I think it's a really interesting space because you're fundamentally trying to distill reliable, predictable, reasonable behavior from systems that are not that.
And how flexible is that system, I guess, with working with different companies operating different domains? You mentioned SiriusXM and Deliveroo, two very different companies. How flexible is that system to, I guess, different applications, different domain spaces? And what's that like working with?
Yeah, I think there's some parts of the stack that translate completely. Our agents are almost exclusively end customer facing, so you can go onto the SiriusXM website and chat with it. And that exposes them to all kinds of abuse. I'm sure some people in this room will try to break one of their agents. Sure. And so there are some parts of the stack that are kind of universal and that translate very well. And we have kind of tests and simulation suites to deal with like red teaming of these agents and translate those over. But then I think the important part is actually that you build tooling to build completely custom test suites, because every business ultimately is different. And we try and simulate all the way down to we call them fixtures of the APIs that the agent is interacting with. So you might have a custom homegrown CRM that expects certain inputs and output behaviors. And we want to simulate the agent like in its virtual environment completely as it will be in production. And so we have all this tooling to create fake users, interact, change the database in the background, etc. We published some work called Tau Bench. There's now Tau Squared, Tau 2 Bench.
I think Tau Squared Bench.
Tau Squared, the second iteration.
It's meant to be read, not spoken.
And it's meant to be read. And that paper talks a lot about like how do you actually benchmark an agent and make sure it's good. And you basically have the agent behave, Tau 2 Bench, it behaves against another agent in a virtual environment. And you're checking kind of database hashes at the end to make sure that the right things happen verifiably.
So what do you think makes a good test for an agent?
I think the hardest part is both the agent is a non-deterministic thing and humans are very non-deterministic and hard to predict, right? And so you need to simulate both sides well.
Tau Squared Bench.
Tau Squared, that's the squared part. And a good test then becomes, how do you actually define what a happy outcome is? Where, everything that happens in the middle, you actually don't need to care about that much as long as your output is very well defined. That is ultimately the insight from Tau Bench is, at the end, I expect my flight to have been changed from X to Y, and I can verify that. How I get there, I don't need to worry about. As long as that is true, it happened. On top of that, though, you actually do care about how it happened because, you don't want your agent saying swear words to your customer all the way, and at the end, you have your flight rebooked. And so you have both verifiable things that go into these tests where you're trying to see, okay, how do we enforce determinism and actually verify the right outputs? But then we use a lot of LLMs as judges on top of that to verify that the conversation follows a certain pattern, certain things don't happen like swear words and stuff like that.
So I guess when you're making a couple of assumptions about an industry and the kind of interactions customers will have, what are those initial tests like, and then how does that grow to be hundreds, possibly thousands, tens of thousands of tests that cover all these different use cases that you might have when, like you're saying, non-deterministic people who can ask anything. Maybe they do want swear words, maybe they don't, but they're going to ask. And how do you actually end up covering all those test cases? How does that grow as you work with the customer?
I think we have a pretty good out-of-box kind of insights at this point, having worked with lots of different industries. If whether you sell jeans or T-shirts, you'll see similar things. If returns, where's my order? I lost it, etc. And so we've built pretty good kind of out-of-box test suites. But then very importantly, part of that agent development lifecycle is, you run, call it 1,000 simulations, you see how the agent is actually behaving, you find issues, and you turn those into additional regression tests. And so I think of it almost as like building this progressive harness around the agent where you have like this suite of regression tests that you can really trust over time. And of course, once you're in production, these systems are non-deterministic. Sometimes something goes wrong. You can't avoid that. What you want to avoid, though, is like making the same mistake twice. And so you want to, as you have AI and humans do kind of sample reviews of those conversations, turn those into additional tests and make it more robust over time.
Have either of you encountered any unexpected or any funny outputs that you weren't expecting that you had to put in some tests for?
There are a lot of cases where there's something kind of delightfully funny. There was a case, where oftentimes if you use a particular emoji and it's not necessarily, and it's like a positive emoji, an agent might pick up on that and kind of communicate with you in the same way that you like to communicate with them.
I don't have a lot I have a few fun ones that come to mind. One is when we were first building these simulation products, there's the infinite thank you loop of, the agent is saying thank you, and it's like, no, you're welcome. No, you're welcome.
Yeah, 2 agents, actually, you get funny stuff.
It went on for like 2,000 messages, cost us a bunch of money. So that was a funny one. We put guardrails on that. And then the ones that if I ever have a bad day at work, which happens at times, you feel a bit down, I go into some of our agents and you search for like a heart emoji or something like that. And you see people actually like genuinely saying thank you, like you solved my problem. And so there's a lot of that you actually do see. And it's kind of an indication, maybe scary or not scary, of like, when these systems do a good job, they can actually feel very human and very empathetic. And so, yeah, those stick out as I like think about real conversations.
That's quite sweet. The emojis at the end of the day.
It is.
Nice.
It is.
You mentioned guardrails there. So, like, what are the kind of key layers that are involved in making a really concrete product that has fallbacks, that has different layers and guardrails to ensure that when you actually ship this to a customer with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users, and failure cases do occur? Like, what are the kind of key insights around shipping agents in production for those customers?
I think we have a software platform called the Agent SDK. And this basically is a system of goals and guardrails that you can supply to the agent. I would say of all of the things that stood out to me since having been part of Sierra, this is maybe the most genius in terms of, I was not involved in its creation directly, but the concepts behind it and kind of the ability to steer context and understand exactly what to give to large language models and how to invoke 5 or 10 or 15 at once in concert to get the right answer is just something that I had never really thought of. And I spent about 9 months before I joined Sierra just working on my own startup ideas and trying to build with AI and not being as smart as the people at Sierra were. So I was really impressed by that. I think under the hood, it's basically a software framework where you can specify what the agent is trying to achieve, what the guardrails should be. And it's just smarter than what you would get with a prompt. I think the other piece of it is that it's interconnected with the agent development lifecycle. So whenever a new issue gets reported, that creates a regression test, which is part of the simulations, which is tested before each release. And so I think everyone here who's built with large language models probably understands that feeling of you're having some unintended behavior, you like go to plug it, and then the increased pressure, like juice squirts out the other side. And so it's kind of like you're always kind of plugging holes or playing whack-a-mole or whatever the analogy that you want to use is. And the Agent SDK, there's like no better way to put it than it just doesn't have that property. And so you can fix a problem, and because of its interconnectedness with the agent development lifecycle, you can kind of rest assured that if juice is going to squirt out the other side, you know about it immediately, and you can kind of plug that too. So you do a lot less learning in production, and the guardrails are somewhat more isolated to the actual area that you're trying to fix.
Yeah. One of the things I think we're juggling a lot at Granola is trying to manage that context, concurrency, and compute. Like, how much compute do we allocate to a single query, and how do we manage tokens and optimize for that? Is that something that you guys are concerned about, or are you kind of primarily concerned about quality? Because there's a relationship, I guess, between how long you allow an agent to think, for example, how much compute that costs, the latency, how long you have to wait, and then the actual quality of the output. So how do you guys kind of balance those trade-offs?
We're ultra concerned about latency. So we get some of the benefits of being concerned about latency when it comes to cost. We run a ton of stuff in parallel. I would say we're not necessarily directly, cost is not the top priority because there's a lot of value in these interactions. You have customers who are going through potentially a negative experience with a business who might pay this business hundreds or thousands of dollars per year. And so just delivering the best customer experience is top of mind. But because we're so obsessed with latency, we end up using reasoning models only in limited cases. Although everything's a reasoning model now, but using reasoning tokens only in limited cases.
Yeah, sure. I think we've primarily spoken about, I guess, the chat use case. I know Sierra's launched voice agents as well. I think was it last September or so?
October, yeah.
October even. What's the kind of unique opportunity for voice agents and also the unique challenges of that modality for AI?
I said we're meticulous about latency. It's because of voice. I think we cared a lot about latency before voice, but now it's jumped, to the top of the list, just one below quality. The other thing that you have to be very meticulous about is phrasing. I think something that sounds just a little off when you read it will sound extremely robotic when you say it aloud. And so teaching large language models to basically express things in a way where, yeah, that's how a human would talk is quite challenging. I think also there are a lot of different parts of the stack in voice that aren't in chat. So, you can try to do everything kind of in one shot with a multimodal model that takes speech in and returns speech out. But have fun making API calls with those voice tokens, right? You also need to transcribe things if you want to use user inputs to make API calls. So you need a transcription layer in your stack. Most of our voice interactions happen over the phone. So we need to think about telephony. We need to think about telephony transfers. We need to do different call center integrations from what we do for chat. And then also the speech itself. I mentioned the phrasing, but then also kind of the voice, the personality behind that. So you have a lot more layers of the stack. And then because latency is such a big concern and you're adding more layers to the stack, some of which are kind of in the critical path of the flow of data, you have to be like extra efficient, parallelize everything as much as you can. And sometimes we'll do like speculative computation as well. So as an example, you might ask a question and we'll just look up in the knowledge base in case there should be a knowledge base lookup before we even know if we're going to use the result. And then we get the result back and we'll decide, oh, do we want to use this? And if not, we just discard it. But we've saved the time that it would have taken to go do a retrieval and a ranking step. And so those kinds of clever tricks on the engineering side are now a big part of what I think differentiates Sierra.
And what kind of opportunities does voice open up for, I guess, a lot of your partners, the businesses that you work with? What kind of use cases are you finding for voice that maybe suits the voice context better versus chat? How do your customers kind of utilize both those?
I mentioned when I joined, my first assignment was to help build the SiriusXM agent. And one of the first things I learned doing discovery with the customer was that they get a large volume of chat conversations every year, but they get almost an order of magnitude more phone calls. And so it kind of hit me over the head that this is a big opportunity specifically for this customer. And in a lot of cases, each one of those interactions, they wait on hold for longer. They don't necessarily have as good of an experience just going through the traditional channels. And so there's just a lot of value you can provide by getting someone an answer right away, helping them get their radio working or manage an issue with their account, make a payment, all of these things. And so I don't know if this started the project, but before the project existed, I spent some time just prototyping what it would look like to build a voice agent using some open source tools around the chat API. And it was not very good, but it was not terrible enough it was non-terrible enough to convince us that, hey, maybe we should think about this sooner versus later. And then that actually kind of just snowballed as a project from my sort of, extra nights and weekends project into becoming the voice platform and kind of building that out. And SiriusXM, I think, was the second customer we went live with. Even though they have large volume, they were pretty excited about testing it and being a design partner with us. And so that was kind of the process behind it.
And I guess I'm curious, how do you guys feel about models in general? I know recently in the International Maths Olympiad, Google and OpenAI's teams both said they were actually surprised at how generalized these models were for rather than being, I guess, specifically trained on maths problems, and how a generalized solution was really effective. I'm curious, or I guess on the agentic side, do you think they'll be kind of more focused on a specific task, models that perform better on specific tasks, or is it as these models get better, as generalized models get better, that all the agentic workflows will also improve as well?
I think both. Right, the base models are getting better, but often you will find that distilling down one of those base models actually has better cost, latency, performance trade-offs, especially if you fine-tune. And then I think Zach made the joke at the start, but RL seems to work, and the domains seem to transfer to a degree. So, RL on math and coding, which are like verifiable domains, seem to transfer to like general reasoning capabilities. And so as you scale all that stuff up, I think we will continue just to see improvements. For us at the applied layer, what that means is that we get basically more intelligence to play with. And there are some tasks where you actually don't need that much intelligence. And what that means is that like we just get to use a smaller model that is cheaper and faster to run to like do those tasks. But then where we need it, we're excited to use, the GPT-5s and 6 and 7s of the world, because we will be able to do more. And plug it into what we have. I'm personally, for example, less worried that you just have one model that does it all, just because the characteristics, at least so far, until we hit AGI, I guess, seem to be that building really good agents is actually like more of an engineering problem than just throw a model at the thing problem.
How important is human feedback in that reinforcement learning cycle? Is that a big focus at Sierra when you're, I guess, improving and iterating on these agentic systems, or do you just kind of give it some heuristic and let it improve over time?
It's quite important. Ultimately, every business is different, right? And the people in that business tend to know exactly what the policies and the methods, etc., are. Things are also like poorly documented. We're all very fallible, right? Like somebody has done something for 30 years, there's just a lot of stuff in their head that is like not documented. And so, while we rely on AI to like review basically everything, every conversation that a Sierra agent is having is also reviewed by, a separate Sierra agent. Kind of having sampling and humans, calibrate, give feedback, and make it better over time is quite important.
One thing I'll add, just because you said, we have more intelligence to play with every time there's a new foundation model, with a few exceptions. I've been really impressed with the engineering team and Sierra's leadership when it comes to not being tied to the solution that we had with the previous amount of intelligence. So what I mean by that is at the earliest iterations of the company, some of the reasoning had to be a bit rigid, because if you gave it the flexibility that it has out of the box, it would hallucinate. There's just no way to stop it. So you have to like only reveal the right amount of context so that you don't go beyond the reasoning capabilities of the model itself. And on multiple occasions, the team has reinvented kind of how different tasks and skills work to play with the increased intelligence and reap the flexibility gains. Because sometimes if you throw GPT-5 at a framework that worked well with GPT-3, it's going to not do justice to the power of GPT-5. Yeah. And so that's the constant challenge for us too, is kind of reinventing the framework, rebuilding on top of the agent SDK to take advantage of the latest available intelligence, which is an extremely creative and challenging and just cognitively dissonant task, because like that's your baby and you have to acknowledge that it's no longer necessarily the right solution. Yeah. So I think it goes to show just how, the team kind of gets back to just the base assumptions, just kind of the first principles behind what they're building, and is very disciplined about that exercise.
Great. I think that's a nice note to open up to the floor and see if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask. Yes, go ahead.
What would you say is the biggest blocker to get to those 200% resolution rates? How much of that delta is just a lack of foundation model capabilities, agent capabilities, or like the messiness of real-world integrations?
It's a really good question. I wouldn't underestimate the messiness of the real world. I think that's actually the that's my answer usually to like, even if we had AGI tomorrow, like we wouldn't just be in flying cars. Like it's pretty messy to get these things deployed. There is certainly like still kind of model capability and can you truly reason through the entire problem space well enough to solve every problem? But I think if I think about some of our highest resolution rate customers, they're like approaching the 90s. And usually that means, the agent can do a lot. Like there is parity between what humans can do and, when they log into their admin panel versus what our agent can do. That's why, I think our team provides a lot of value because like ultimately we work closely with those customers to solve for the mess that is within those customers, and then also bring the abstractions back to the platform to, the third customer in a given industry that works with Sierra should have an easier time than the second and the first, right? And that way, like, we'll scale and compound.
Can you tell us a bit more about the data governance? So, for example, do you have separate simulation environments for each customer, or is it the shared data? Or
Yeah, we have a lot of large enterprise customers, and so typically we skew, all the way to the end of kind of buttoned up, isolated data, and then maybe even more. Basically each customer's data is for that customer, and that's typically how it works.
Can you talk about like how is it within different industries? Is there some specific industries where you see this to be very successful, whereas some others where it's not, and why maybe?
So my bull case for Sierra is actually that we work across a lot of industries, and the moments that matter for customers are different, but they all have their own value. And I certainly hope that the Sierra for X is just Sierra. That will make us both very happy. But more seriously, I think like most industries have some level of like high touch customer engagements, like negotiating a plan, et cetera. That's kind of the same whether you're upselling a credit card or you're doing something in healthcare. And so, us having kind of a horizontal platform that allows you to build these very customized agents has proven that like we can actually be very successful across industries. Big question for me is like, which are the ones that you now go after, quickly, because of course it's a very competitive market, and there will be lots of like kind of more vertical players out there.
Yeah, we're building a customer support agent sort of internally ourselves.
Cool.
And one of the challenges we face is that even if a customer has reached a resolution, like there's nothing more they could get out of talking to a human, they don't feel like that. They feel like if only I could talk to this human and get that refund that I was planning on getting. How do you think about that as a problem with Sierra? And but people still want escalation.
Yeah, we work with a lot of fintechs, and when it comes to money, right? Like people are already pretty emotional. Credit card got declined, my direct deposit is not here, etc. And what we found is that there's a huge difference between just telling the answer and telling you the answer in a very empathetic way. And so we actually found that investing a lot more into like making the agent sound very human, acknowledge that this sucks, let me go check for you. Unfortunately, we can't do anything for you. It made a difference. It doesn't fully solve it. It's the same, if they actually call a human and the human, gives them the answer, they probably also won't feel fully satisfied. But we see meaningful like difference in terms of like the resolution rates and also the CSAT scores after those conversations.
Yeah, yourself.
So in the current user journey, the users are coming to agents with problems and questions in mind. As you mentioned, there are boxes in everywhere. How do you envision the transition where the agent will become the user journey itself?
So I think two ways to interpret this question. One is sort of the concept of more proactive engagement. Agents checking in, how can they help, noticing something without necessarily being prompted. Number two would be, the user experience of an application or website becoming more agent-driven. Which one of those are you referring to?
Yeah, I'm curious, like how do you see the envision, like the clients that you are working, they have their own flows that you're integrating into. Do you see Sierra playing a role to change that to more agent-driven interactions in the first place, so they don't need to come to help?
Yeah, so I think more along the lines of the first one of kind of how can we be proactive. It gets a little bit to Paul's comment about plugging into all of the systems. Right now, I think we're kind of at layer 0, layer 1 of connecting to APIs, being able to do the things that people can do from an agent desktop programmatically. But we also often are interacting with the CRM, for example, and seeing, oh, this account is in this certain state. This could be like the right way to make them satisfied in the future. We already have a number of cases that kind of look like this. Typically, there will be a round of analysis at the end of a conversation, which we call our post-conversation hook. We need a better brand name for this. But this analysis, maybe like supervisor, this post-conversation hook will run on the data from the conversation and basically earmark follow-ups. So one of the delights of working at Sierra is we have a team of amazing advisors that are actually quite present and help out with the things that they're experts at in different industries. And one of them was previously the manager of a restaurant in New York called 11 Madison Park, and kind of took it from being a pretty good bistro to the best restaurant in the world. And so he has a book called Unreasonable Hospitality, and has kind of described to us what happens when you show up at 11 Madison Park and all of the notes they take about how they can make an amazing experience for you. If you haven't had a New York hot dog, they'll run out and get one and plate it and make it feel really special. And so that's kind of what we see as the gold standard of what we want to do. But we have steps in that direction with each of our agents where we might leave a note in a customer's CRM, basically the user database, to say, oh, this is how you should follow up with them. And that also helps us from a business perspective kind of flip the switch from customer service, which is typically more of a cost center, to actually creating new revenue opportunities as well.
Last one over here.
Just talk a bit about agent development. So what do you think about the current state of frameworks, SDKs, and then how does Sierra SDK want to position itself differently?
Yeah, we're biased. We like ours. No, I think it's actually great what's going on in the kind of open source community. You obviously have the LangChains, et cetera, of the world, and I think over time, the same as like the early web and mobile kind of days, I think the industry will figure out like what good and bad patterns are, and I actually think like we will probably inherit tons of ideas from open source as like smart people around the world have good ideas. Right now, I think we've had some good ideas early on that have allowed us to like build agents probably a bit more easily and a bit more robustly than the rest of the market, and it's served us well. We're trying to like not compete as a framework, but we're really trying to compete as a solution. That solution happens to come with a really amazing framework to write agents in that like all of us really enjoy developing on. But ultimately, the value proposition going back to going deep with businesses is like, can you deliver the outcome? And can you enable these customers to then continue delivering outcomes without us, which means that you need to have a development platform. You need to have tools for folks inside those companies to like maintain and expand and own their agent. But we're not trying to like, take out LangChain. I think it's a very good thing that all of those exist, and we'll, as an industry, kind of figure out good patterns.
I'd add that we're just a little bit more purpose-built, so we get to be biased in part because integration with the platform and serving the customers who are in our orbit or in our sites in the long term is our priority. Most open source frameworks like LangGraph or Agents SDK from OpenAI are a bit more base layer in terms of what they offer, and so they can serve literally everyone from a person in their garage to a student in school. And so by having to serve more and more people, you can go just a little bit less deep with each one. And so I think it's just different audiences in a way. But we've also had cases where you can build some things on those platforms that are similar. But if you want to go really deep for some of the kind of customer experience solutions, I think we're biased, but we like ours. Thanks for having us.